Well, it sure seemed like a long time since we covered the Mega Man X franchise, and after dealing with the insanity that was Mega Man X6, I sure needed at least a month's vacation worth away from it, so much so that I was even begging for a Mega Man X9 just to put myself out of my own misery. But since then, and after a long introspection about me, the channel, and the future beyond, I decided to strap my Mega Buster and come back to the X franchise, given that we are still not done. After all, we still have like a few more games to boot, and one more that I know everyone is asking if I ever feel like it should burn to the ground. And what better way is there to jump back into the Mega Man X action and marathon that I started nearly a year ago this time around? Well, by going back into the handheld setting, especially the Game Boy Color, baby. Yes, the Game Boy Color. While a handheld I never grew up with, considering I am only 22 years old, this handheld system, according to many, was like the greatest gift of all time, up there with the Nintendo DS and GBA respectively. Being the sequel to the Game Boy original, the Game Boy Color truly enhanced the quality of life of handheld gaming, especially thanks to that color processing, enabling new experiences that would have rivaled that of the console games if it wanted to. With games like Link's Awakening DX, Pokemon Gold and Silver, and even Wario Land 3, the Game Boy Color was taking in new ways to express handheld gaming back in the late 90s to early 2000s, and Capcom saw no exception to not be a part of it, releasing some titles for the console like Resident Evil Gaiden and even helped develop the Legend of Zelda Oracle titles. It wasn't until the Mega Man Xtreme games that saw the attention of those who wanted to try out the Blue Bomber on the handheld, with Xtreme 1 releasing in October of 2000 and then Xtreme 2 in July of 2001. It's also pretty crazy too to think about that throughout my time as a Mega Man X fan, I didn't really know about these games' existence up until Some Call Me Johnny made a video about it back in 2018, but it also wasn't like I wasn't familiar with the concept and ideas that the Mega Man franchise was also on the handheld. You see, before diving into these games, I was well aware that Mega Man had a strong footing in the handheld market, at least during the early 2000s with the Game Boy Advance and later on with the Nintendo DS. There was the Mega Man Zero franchise that was there to expand on Zero's story as a Reploid fighting for peace on Earth and retaining that Mega Man X fast-paced platforming, as well as Mega Man Battle Network, where it was going into a completely different direction with more of an RPG-like structure to it for the Blue Bomber, and the results for these sub-series were pretty great for the most part. Circa the DS days, there was even the ZX franchise that was a sequel to the Zero games, where humans can now perform some Digimon Frontier Sailor Moon-like transformations just to become the legendary heroes of old, and Star Force, where it was a 3D version of the Battle Network games, with Geostellar being the new poster boy for the Mega Man name back then. We can discuss more about those games down the line, but besides all of that, I think I pretty much said too much as is, so let's just dive straight into these games, shall we? Starting with, of course, well, Mega Man Xtreme 1. Xtreme 1 starts us off with X dozing off in the HQ break room, where suddenly he is reminded of days of old as he shows up in the first stage in Mega Man X. Perplexed by wondering why he's even back in the past, he explores through the nostalgic locale and ends up meeting Vile once again. Vava, as I guess they didn't even bother to localize his name. After beating Vile's ass in the quote retweets because X is that guy, X awakens back to the present to learn from Zero that the Maverick Hunter mother computer was suddenly hijacked and all the data of X has been used for malicious intent, intending to bring back the data of old foes that X once fought in the past in an effort to revive them and cause Maverick shenanigans. As X tries to stop this, of course, he enlists the help from a Reploid named Mitty, which I guess is the Maverick Hunter HQ's head tech support, and decides to enter cyberspace to stop the mother computer from going haywire, all the while Zero shows up with a big fat peace sign and disappears for the time being, or at least in his words, to take matters to the streets and see who's behind it. I mean, we already know who's behind all of this, but it is what it is, am I right? While searching for the obvious culprit, two new Mavericks are behind the scenes, one gold Shemitah-wielding badass named Zion, and a silver soldier shuriken thrower named Gmail, which I think during the concept phase for these two dorks, Capcom couldn't find any other better name for them than to just look at the Hebrew alphabet and say, yep, that's what we're naming them. Anyways, these guys are the main reason behind the mother computer hijack with the help of Techno, Mitty's brother, who was actually held hostage by the two buffoons, all to ensure that X doesn't succeed in his plans. Of course, X does succeed in his plans, and stopping the two Arabian Knights saves the day as usual after he ends up beating Sigma, who would have thought, of course, and begins to wonder about when true peace will ever be achieved. Yeah, it's that fast of a story plot summary, I am not even kidding. That's all there is to the premise of Xtreme 1 here, so I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest when I end up saying that Xtreme 1 at the end of the day is simply a snack-sized version to the full course meal that is both Mega Man X1 and X2 on the SNES. It's a pretty straightforward game where you just go from point A to point B, revisiting old stages from the two games and beating the Mavericks that belong to each of them, like Chill Penguin from X1 or Flame Stag from X2, except the difference is mostly in how they handle the stage layout and the means of progression. Considering that this game was made to be played on the go, the stages of Xtreme 1 are shorter and less difficult to traverse through, unlike its NES counterpart. This is all thanks to the autosave feature this game has, where it acts as the checkpoint for the stages just in case you ever die or miss your footing and fall in a death pit, which can happen more than once since the controls for this game aren't that fun in my opinion. In fact, while we are on the subject of controls, I get that this is a handheld game, so there is no point in comparing it to the console games, but the controls for X does feel a bit weird here. He dashes just fine when you double press left or right on the D-pad, but his jump is relegated to the A button and B is to shoot. And that right there kind of messed me up big time because normally when I do play platformers, I have it set up to B to jump and A to attack because that's the proper way to play one. But the game doesn't allow you to do that, but instead have you set dash for the start button, and that's just extremely weird, no pun intended. In terms of the stages themselves, they too are somewhat light as this game offers 4 Mavericks only from the start of the game, which again makes sense considering this is a handheld version of the Mega Man X games. They retain the charm of the original counterparts pretty well, and even when looking at the 8-bit renditions of their 16-bit counterparts side by side, you can clearly see that Capcom really hammered in a lot of detail into the sprite work in terms of replicating that similar feel to the console games on the Game Boy Color. Plus, I'm pretty glad to see that in Sigma's first stage here, it doesn't have none of that BS that involved climbing to the very top with so many moving platforms. Like, that was just a delight. After beating the game the first time and calling it a day of sorts, you then get to unlock hard mode, where you really just fight another set of Mavericks and go through the same final stages as before, but you keep all the items you've collected from the first save file and you just kind of continue from there, essentially turning hard mode into a new game plus mode, which entirely defeats the whole purpose of even calling it a hard mode in the first place. But wait, once you beat hard mode, then here comes the bigger challenge this game has to offer, which is extreme mode. Ooh, I wonder what makes this game mode so extreme. It's basically a regular Mega Man X game at this point, where you fight all 8 Mavericks and you kind of just start from scratch. Damn, that's extreme. Yeah, so this is all I can really say much about Xtreme 1 that is relatively new in terms of its experience, at least besides the cool Zero abilities you can collect, which summon Zero to battle and do some pretty cool attacks against enemies, but not much else. It's really the same as before, with heart tanks to collect, armor parts to find from Dr. Light, who I guess just shows up anywhere nowadays, and sub-tanks that you normally find back in the console games. Pretty simple in its execution, and honestly that's fine by me since it just means there's a sense of familiarity to be had with these games, even though I can always just play the original versions thanks to the Legacy Collection that's practically everywhere. So though, gotta give credit where credit is due here because this game did grant me access to both the Hadouken and the Shuriken without having to do much thought about it, or at least learn how to, play a fighting game. And if I were to categorize Mega Man Xtreme 1, it would be like that show and tell project you would present to the class in elementary school, where it's harmless as both a concept and a game, but it's not really something that's super impressionable. It gets the job done for an X game, but don't expect too much of it in terms of its end result. But Xtreme 2 on the other hand, well, that one is definitely an entirely different case here. Okay, well, sort of. Starting off with a plot immediately for this one, it seems that a mysterious event has occurred throughout the world where Reploids are suddenly becoming hollow shells, being categorized as the erasure phenomenon. As part of the investigation as to why Reploids are suddenly losing their soul data and becoming these robot zombies, Maverick Hunter HQ tasks both X and Zero this time to a remote island known as Laguz Island, just to see the matters for themselves and stop the threat before it's too late with the help and assistance from Iris. Wait, what? Yeah, so I think I forgot to mention this, but the Mega Man Xtreme games here are also canon to the Mega Man X games. Mega Man Xtreme 1 takes place in between the events of both X2 and X3, and Xtreme 2 takes place between Mega Man X3 and X4, adding some level of explaining the in-betweens of what had happened before and after certain events of each numbered entry. Hell, the erasure incident that this game introduces was even referenced back in Mega Man X6, so it really is the little things that count with this game's continuity. or whatever the continuity is. After all, remember, X6 completely screwed all that over. But as for Iris here, she really is just mission report, and it kind of makes sense because she did strike me as someone who would be behind the scenes and ensure that her friends are safe and sound from all the fighting, making her an X4 feel a lot more impactful in terms of why she didn't want anyone in a fight, period. Still, I do wish they could have done more with Iris here, but hindsight is always 20/20, isn't it? In any case, X and Zero infiltrate Laguza Island to then find themselves backed in a corner as this medieval knight named Gareth and later on this witch by the name of Bracana decide to play a game with the two Maverick Hunters by resurrecting old foes from X1, X2, and now even X3 to see how strong they are, while they basically use the souls they've collected to become stronger and conquer the world. Or something along those lines. Now, as a sidebar here, Bracana and Gareth are easily the better antagonists in my opinion when compared to Zane and Gimmel from Mega Man Xtreme 1. No magic carpet will impress me as much as Bracana's witch theme attire does, and the same can even be said with Gareth here, who somehow reminds me of Omega from Mega Man 03. Yeah, I know that game released way after this one, but keep in mind that I've never really played these games until now. And with all jokes aside, just by looking at Bracana and how she even engages with X and Zero throughout the game honestly made me wish for like an IDW comic book series with the X franchise where Bracana's like Doronjo from Yatterman with Zion and Gimmel assisting her in the process like they're her goons, but I think that's better to leave it to my own imagination. Much like any other Mega Man X game, X and Zero then beat up Bracana and Gareth and later Sigma because, well, of course you do, which after about an hour and a half later, X and Zero then save the day, leave the island, and the credits roll. Oh, and Iris gets to live for the time being. Seriously though, she deserved a much better Capcom, but at least she's back alive in Mega Man X Dive, which I believe is also canon to the games, but I'm not really gonna do a deep dive into that rabbit hole just yet. But yeah, Xtreme 2 is basically Xtreme 1, but slightly better graphically and mechanically. I mean, this game is roughly a year older than Xtreme 1, but you can definitely see that Capcom was a bit more comfortable with the 8-bit sprite work this time around. The colors are a lot vibrant and the cutscenes feel like there is a lot more effort placed into them when compared to the first game in terms of art direction and style. Though I do feel like this time around some of the sprite work and animation kind of went missing, if you know what I mean, but I think I can blame the emulation on this one since I am using RetroArch and MGBA for recording footage and, well, playing the game. Sorry, not sorry. And yeah, I am aware that you could have gotten these games on the Virtual Console via the Nintendo 3DS, but that eShop has long been dead, so yeah, you know how it is. And for Xtreme 2 here, Capcom even decided to go all out in terms of originality as the stages for the Mavericks seem to be a mesh from all three games, seamlessly combining them into a neat and satisfying stage layout. Volt Catfish and Neon Tiger are good examples of this point when you compare them to their SNES original stage layout, and I honestly quite like this approach in the long run, which is also funny to me because if you take a look back at my review of Mega Man X3, you see that I, for one, well, I wasn't a huge fan of the whole original stage layout to begin with. Here though, Xtreme 2 does add a lot of creativity into the mix and it means to want to see what makes this game different besides graphics and of course controls. Oh boy. Similar to Xtreme 1, the controls of Xtreme 2 are the same as before, and with the armor parts you get for X here, you get to unlock the air dash from both X2 and X3 with the press of the A button, as well as the Giga Crush for the body part where it's not as appealing as before, but again, this is the Game Boy Color. There even is the part system from X5 and X6 here for Xtreme 2, allowing additional perks for X and Zero as they traverse through familiar territory. The means to get these parts is by collecting DNA souls, which you won't take too long finding them since most of the enemies will drop them when defeated, and it's pretty funny to see that by far this handheld game has the better upgrade system compared to the console games. Yeah, unlike X5 and X6, the part system here feels way more beneficial and extremely advantageous when you're cruising through the game. Seriously, grab this speed shot and power shot and upgrade those parts to the max and you'll see how much it breaks the game in two. Like, witness firsthand how much power you have at the palm of your hand as X charges full blast with some extreme charge shots without a care in the world. Man, he really isn't playing around this time. I mean, who could blame him after the failure that was Mega Man X6? We also can't forget that unlike Xtreme 1, Xtreme 2 allows us to swap between Zero and X in real time, as yes, Zero is now playable here and has his own campaign to deal with too, which is much like X's except you get to play as Zero. His moveset is just a bite-sized version of the console game, so don't really expect too much from him, and he does get results somewhat done, and is just a second character to play as part of this package you got going here. for his own campaign too. He even has his own set of Mavericks to deal with while X has his, and that adds a lot of replay value in my eyes since it makes both campaigns stand out from each other, unlike the console games where it's roughly the same stages and bosses. And again, it just really is nice to see how much in real time you can swap between the two characters, but like in X5, they don't really have a shared health upgrade system, so it's a matter of balancing out who gets what in terms of heart tanks and weapons, but it honestly doesn't really make things any harder regardless. Extreme mode is also here where you fight all 8 Mavericks like in Mega Man Xtreme 1, but again, it's just another regular Mega Man X game, and this is mainly done just to beat Sigma in the end and kinda claim the true ending. It does add a better incentive than Xtreme 1's Extreme mode, that's for sure, and I kinda like Extreme 2 because of that. Overall, much like Extreme 1, this is pretty much it in terms of what I have to say about Mega Man Xtreme 2, and between this one and Extreme 1, I honestly prefer this one overall in terms of its novelty as a handheld game. It does a lot of things better than Extreme 1, and its quality is simply a caliber above the first one. Again, a shame that the only means to try these games out nowadays is through emulation, as you were able to get them on the 3DS Virtual Console, but you know how that ended up being. But hey, if you do have it sitting there collecting dust on your 3DS, then try them out and see for yourself. But bottom line, are these games good is what you're probably asking, and yeah, they practically are, which is both great and ironic considering that these games released around the time X5 and X6 rolled into store shelves. And if you asked me, comparing side by side between the two games here, you can see that Capcom learned a lot for the handheld games, that it wouldn't be surprising to say that they probably took some inspiration from these games for the Mega Man Zero franchise that also released around this time for the GBA, which again, that's gonna be a topic for another day. In the end, the Extreme games here were a nice break from the console games, especially with whatever the hell X6 was at the end of the day, but obviously we're not done with the X franchise yet, since after these games, well, we gotta jump back into the console setting again with the infamous X7. Yeah, the one game in the entire franchise, and dare I say Mega Man history, that holds the biggest L there is. But why, you may be asking? Well, you gotta wanna like, comment, and subscribe to find that out. And also be a member today so you get to watch that 2 days early. Anyways, I'm heading out now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and see you with that next one, especially because I really need some sleep after this one. But let me know what other games you want me to tackle next and review, since we are now towards the end game portion of the X franchise here, and honestly after this, I was thinking maybe some Kirby, but hey, only time will tell on that one for sure. And also how big my wallet gets if this ends up blowing up.